One thing I believe we all have in common, we want to leave a lasting mark on this world for the better. But our legacy isn't just about what we leave behind, it's about what we build every day. Through our words, our actions, and the values that we pass on, we're building a story that outlives us. But how do we build a legacy and how do we pass that on to the next generation? Join us as we talk to Morgan Malone about leaving a lasting legacy today on Call to Lead. Today on Call to Lead, we have a special guest. My friend Morgan Malone was the first pastor that I ever worked for. When I felt called to ministry, he took a chance and hired me as an intern. I spent 2 years learning from him, Dave Renfro, Kevin Towery, and several others at First Baptist Church in Bonham, Texas, learning how to be a pastor, learning how to be a minister, and things that I apply to this day. A couple of years later, Morgan performed the marriage ceremony when my wife and I got married. He did marriage counseling with us. And to this day, when I have problems at church or come across difficult situations, he's one of the people I call and ask for advice, and he always gives it freely. Morgan has a wonderful wife, Kathy, and 4 fantastic kids who are all adults now, and he has a lot of grandkids that I'm sure he'll want to talk about. And one of the things that I wanted to talk with Morgan about was about leaving a legacy. So join us today as we talk about legacy. What is it? How do we leave it? And how do we build on that? All right. Welcome once again to Called to Lead. Today, we have my friend Morgan Malone. I'm going to let Morgan tell a little bit about himself. Morgan, would you just introduce yourself? Tell us about your family, a little bit about where you've been in ministry and where you are right now.
Yeah. First, let me say thank you so much, Colby, for your willingness to invite me to be a part of your podcast. It's always a risk when you invite somebody to come on, and I appreciate your willingness to entrust me with that. Hopefully, I won't embarrass you or your wife or anyone else that we're aware of in our conversation. I have known you for a long time and really appreciate your willingness to let me be on. As far as who I am married. Kathy and myself have 4 children. Their names are Jeffrey and Andrew, Levi, and Ashton. And 3 of the 4 graduated from Bonham High School. They would call themselves Bonham Purple Warriors. Our youngest daughter graduated from Pilot Point. And along the way, I have been privileged to pastor 3 different churches, which took up about 26 years of ministry. And then the last 12 years, I've had the privilege of being the director of missions for Denton Baptist Association, which is located in Denton County, and we have a few churches outside that county as well. We also have 7 grandkids. And the reason I bring that up is because my son Levi and his wife had their son, their first child, on Sunday. And then our youngest daughter.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you, man. I appreciate that. They're excited about that. And then our youngest daughter, Ashton, she's due with number 8 on August 26th. So we love kids. We love having them around, and family has always been a big deal to us. So yeah, so that's me and my family.
So you're executive director, right, of Denton Baptist Association. Is that your title?
Whatever you want to call me, man. Yeah, technically it's executive director, but most of the time guys will say director of missions. That makes more sense to them.
So tell us kind of what Denton Baptist Association, what you're involved in, like what different ministries, what different things that y'all do. Some people may know what a director of missions does and what a Baptist association may do, and some may not. So kind of share a little bit about different ministries you guys are tied into and some of the things that y'all do.
Yeah. So we are a diverse network of churches who exist to reach all peoples with the gospel. And really, we've got 3 focuses. One is in the area of church strengthening. So we do individual consultations. I know we had a consultation with 7th and Main with another friend of mine named Bobby Hicks. And so we try and help churches to revision. I do coaching as part of that, coaching church planters as well as individual pastors. We provide different kinds of seminars. We're getting ready to do a leadership training conference next week, and we'll have about 250 of our folks from various churches there to learn how to be better leaders in the local church. So that's church strengthening. Secondly is partnering with churches to plant churches. Currently, we have 10 church plants that Denton Baptist Association is helping to fund that are located in the North Texas area. What's unique about it, Colby, is that one of those, their heart language is Chinese. We have 2 Asian Indian congregations that speak English, but yet the heart language of both of those pastors, one is Tamil or Tamil and the other is Malayalam. We have a Haitian church that's a part of the planting process. We have 2 Korean churches, and then we have a couple of English-speaking churches, and we have 1 Texan church. So I like to tell people, we've got a couple of those that speak Texan. It's not always the best English, but it is English. So we fund church plants, and then we also train church planters. We're utilizing material that the North American Mission Board has created. And so we invite guys into a 1-year residency, and they are working in a local church, but then they're also coming to a cohort that meets every other week. And they work with us for a year. And then sometime in that process, they're assessed. And then if they pass assessment, then we move them toward church planting. The third area we work with churches is in regard to partnering ministries. We have 2 college campuses here in the city of Denton. One is UNT and the other is TWU. And so we have ministries on both of those campuses, Baptist Student Ministries. We're involved in disaster relief. And so when you see Texans on Mission or Texas Baptist Men, we've got a chainsaw crew that goes out and works those areas. We also have a camp that we're connected with, Camp Copus. And then we do work with Texas Motor Speedway through a ministry called Raceway Ministries. And that specifically relates to the race fan on Speedway days when they're having a race. And so we've got folks that are chaplains and that they're caring for the race fan in all of those ways. So our association exists to do those 3 things. And that's what I spend my time doing.
And I can't help but notice you're also wearing a Texas Ranger shirt.
Yeah. I
And
forgot.
if you can tell, I'm wearing the Mavericks because after last night, I could not wear a Ranger shirt today. I had one on and I had to change. I just couldn't do it.
Yeah, I understand that. It was a heartbreaking night for the Rangers to lose it in the 9th inning. Yeah, that was incredibly disappointing. I will say, and I must confess it to you, Colby, I turned the TV off the night before when we were down 5-1, and then I found out the next morning at a men's Bible study that we came back and won. So
yeah, that's why I watched the whole thing just to see him lose.
Yeah,
because I saw the night before and I was like, oh, it can happen. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, there's still time.
There's still another month or so we can get the ship rightened. So moving on to kind of the main topic I wanted to talk with you about today. Everybody, I think, deep down somewhere in our mind, we think about legacy. We think about how will we be remembered? And hopefully we think about that before our funerals. I think before we're, on our deathbed, I think we do. And what I want to talk with you about a little bit, and I know you're humble, and so you're not going to brag. You'll brag on your kids and you won't brag on you. So I'll have to do some of that for you. But one of the things that I look at, and when I think of legacy, I think of the impact that's left in a place when you're no longer there. And now you have legacy, you can build legacy while you're there. But when I look at a long part of your ministry life was at First Baptist Bonham. How long were you there? How many years? 13 years. That's a long time in ministry. I mean, that's a long time to stay at the same place. I've been at 7th and Main for about 15. And one of the things why I think your time there was impactful to me was because I was blessed by it, because I surrendered to ministry kind of probably in the middle of that time, maybe towards the beginning, earlier part of it is when you guys hired me as an intern. I felt called to ministry that summer and y'all hired me to stay on for a couple of years until I went and found a full-time job somewhere else in ministry. The other intern that y'all hired that summer, I ended up marrying 2 years later. So that was important. Then I remember sitting in staff meetings with Dave Renfro and you and Kevin Towery, 3 people who I credit a lot with who I am today, especially as a pastor, because I learned so much in that 2 years. I got to see staff meetings and dealing with conflict and all these different issues that you a lot of times don't think about when you think about ministry, but are vital parts of it. And there are things that I learned there that I still apply not only in ministry, but in the fire department and personal communications with people as a leader, as a station officer at work. There's things that I learned from you guys that I still apply daily. There's things in our marriage that you did marriage counseling with us that we still reflect back on. And I'm going to be honest, when I do marriage counseling, because I've done a lot of weddings myself, I steal stuff from you. I steal stuff from lots of people, but one of the people I steal things from is you, because there's some things that you said to us that I still cling to and reflect back on. And so I say all that to brag a little bit, because when we think of legacy, I look at not just where you're at now and not just your kids, and we'll talk about your kids and the legacy that we leave there. But sometimes I think the legacy is what's the place like when you're gone? And not only is that place like, but all the little branches that come off, the vines that come off of the ministry time and ministry, job, family, leadership, business, whatever it is, but all the different people that you influence. And so I want you to understand that when I think of your legacy, I don't think of just your kids. I think of me. I think of 23 years of ministry myself. I think of, I've got 6 or 7 kids who feel called to ministry, who are serving and are helping in my youth, including my own kids. And that's part of your legacy too, because I would not be who I am today without you guys pouring into me over 20 years ago. So as we talk about legacy, I just want to do that. I know you're humble and you won't brag on yourself. So I just wanted to brag and throw that tidbit in that I appreciate you, Dave and Kevin. I appreciate you and other people that I've served with too. I've had lots of godly men and women that I've been privileged to serve on staff with, and I'm thankful for all of you.
Well, yeah, that's very nice of you to say that, Colby. I really, really do appreciate that. I would say this, the way I operate is I am more of a team player or collaborator. And to be honest, what I find is that in the team kind of setting, that's where the synergy kind of comes in. And that's where I've gotten things from the Lord or from the Holy Spirit in some of those conversations. So I appreciate the fact that you brought up Dave Renfro and also Kevin Towery. Dave was, for lack of a better term, kind of the wise sage of the group. He was older in the latter part of his ministry. I was young and didn't always think in the right ways. And then you had Kevin, who just had this personality that kids wanted to hang out with as part of the ministry. And we had what I would call a pretty significant run there for a long time. And to be honest, I think it was because of those players that were in the mix. I mean, I had a conversation with a guy not too long ago, and we were talking about the fact that there was a time that our youth ministry swelled to about 125 to 150 students on Wednesday nights. To be honest, I didn't have anything to do with those guys, but Kevin did. And I guess what I had to do with it was I said, go get them, do your ministry, and I'm going to support you and encourage you. I think one of the things that did help us in regard to student ministry early on was we were involved in Super Summer, and we would always take key students, leaders, to Super Summer. And there was a run there of where we had somewhere between 6 to 8 students who also felt called to ministry. And I think part of that was related to Super Summer. I think another part was we were heavily involved in mission trips. We felt like every person or every family ought to go on a domestic mission trip. And so we tried to make that affordable. We kept the cost down. The church supplemented that. I mean, you mentioned in our conversation that Seventh and Main has allotted a significant money amount for missions. I'm glad you guys are doing that. I think that's a part of a church's success. And when you can send a family on a mission trip of more than 2 or 3, and the price isn't crazy expensive, but it's cheaper, that benefits the whole church. So I think those were helpful things that we did. It was a privilege to have you and Melissa on staff, and I appreciate your words of encouragement there. The statement that you made, I still use some of your stuff. I stole stuff from other guys too, and I use it. And to be honest, if it's helpful to you, man, you use it if it provides benefits. Another element is Kathy and I early on in our marriage, and this is us. I'm not speaking for anybody else. We just made a personal decision that particularly when we had kids, we wanted to stay in the same place as long as we could. And so the first church I pastored 2 years. The second church, First Baptist Church Melissa, we were there for 9 years. And then we came from there to Bonham, and we stayed in Bonham for 13 years. And I've been a director of missions here for almost 12 years. I think legacy involves a willingness to stay. Now, that doesn't work for every guy, and it's not going to work for all individuals. But in our case, with our family, God allowed us to stay in the same place for a while, and I think that helped. I think that helped us.
Yeah, there's a sense of trust, I think, that comes from people when they know that you're kind of a constant, that that if they make you mad, you're not going to leave, that you're plugged in, that you're sold out to, you're going to stay here. And I think that's in every organization when you have somebody that you look at and you say, I can look to them as someone who's going to help lead, but they're not going to get their feelings hurt and leave if we make them mad. They're here for the long haul. There's a sense of trust. And also I think people come to know what to expect because they look and they say, okay, I know these people are trustworthy because they've been here for a long time. And with youth ministry and with pastoring too, it's like me, I'm to the point now where I have former students who have kids old enough to be youth. You know what I mean? And I know you've kind of been there probably, but there's people my age, people I went to school with whose kids are in my youth group. And so there's a sense of that. If when you stay long enough, it's almost like you're part of the wall or part of the building. You're just there, and they're so used to you that you're a known quantity. And I think there's some trust that comes with that.
Yeah, I would concur. There is stability in that. I mean, we live in an incredibly mobile society and an incredibly transient society. I mean, where I am here in Denton County, folks stay somewhere for 2 to 3 years and move to a different house or move to a different city or take a different job. I mean, it's kind of the nature of the area. But to stay in the same location, I think there is something to be said for that. I would offer this caveat: just because a guy has stayed in the same place doesn't necessarily mean good legacy. And
That's true.
a key component obviously for that is, and I didn't come up with this, but the guy that mentored me was a 70-year-old pastor who came to revitalize a church in Melissa, Texas. And what I learned about him was even in his 70s, the guy was a constant learner. And he stayed and pastored that church for about 10 to 12 years. He led them in a building campaign, a relocation campaign. And here the guy is in the latter part of his life, but he left a tremendous legacy. And I think a key element was longevity and then the fact that he was fresh or still willing to be a learner.
We've talked about legacy a little bit and how sometimes part of your legacy could be how long are you there? Because that definitely does impact it. If you're somewhere for a year and do a great job versus somewhere 13 years, 15 years, 20 years and do what looks like a good job, there's different just because of the length of time. That impact looks different. One of the things we talked about a little bit was about your kids. So when I look at your kids, I have two teenagers, right? Connor's 16. My daughter Cammie's 14. We've got driving, we've got cheer, we've got teenage drama, we have relationships, we have all this stuff going on. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of you and Kathy, some of y'all's challenges you faced while raising kids, because when I look at I know all four of your kids. I get to spend time with Andrew lately on a weekly basis because every week there's some kind of issue at the church where they can't get some technology to work. So he calls me. So I've kind of been getting to spend a lot of time with him. So, and planning some events that we're doing together and things. But all of your kids, I've watched them grow up and they've turned out to be great kids. And part of your legacy is what you leave behind. That's your family. Part of that is our family. So what are some purposeful things that you and Kathy did with your kids to encourage them to develop their faith and to kind of build on that legacy of faith that you had? Because I know you said part of that was you wanted to stay somewhere where they could be rooted and planted for as long as possible. What are some other things that you guys did to help encourage them to develop their faith and build that legacy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've thought about that in regard to our conversation today. There were some specific things that we did do early on in our marriage, and when the kids were born, we were reading to them. And a key element for us was the dinner table. I know, for example, Andrew preached a series of sermons this past year on the importance of the dinner table. And he kind of traced through scripture the value of the dinner table. I mean, even the Lord's Supper relates to a dinner table. So we found that when our kids were young, we were reading a devotional book to them, a Bible story, and they were preschoolers. And we made them sit there at the table with us, and they would want to get up and they would want to roam around, but yet we kept them there because we felt like they needed to learn how to sit at the table. They needed to learn how to talk and how to have a conversation. When they got older, we continued with that. We even had kids that would come over and hang out with our kids. And I distinctly remember an instance where one of our kids had a friend that came over. And so we went to the kitchen, we got our food, and then we were going to go sit at the dining room table. Well, this kid, teenager, went upstairs, and we're asking, where is this kid? And one of our kids said, well, I'll go find him. Well, come to find out, at his house, when he got a meal, what they would do is everybody would go to their own room and they would watch TV. Mom and dad kind of captured the living room, but then the kids went to their own room. Well, we didn't do that. We saw it as a huge value for us to sit down, and we would always have a conversation, and we would always ask our kids, what's something good that happened today? What's something you want to share with us? And that would start a conversation. And then we were on the front end of the cell phone movement. And so myself, I would have to say to the family, I'm not going to answer the phone. And then as our kids got older and got a cell phone, in our case, it tended to be either high school or middle school, we would tell them, turn the phone off. And if you don't turn it off, then it's my phone. And so we would collect the phone. So we cultivated this conversation time. And Colby, I distinctly remember, I've got a daughter, Jeffrey, who's running track and she's cheering. And Andrew is in the band and he's playing tennis. And Levi is in football and he's playing junior high football. And then Ashton's in school. And their schedules are incredibly busy. But we made it a point somehow to say to them, hey, we're going to eat at this time. We know what your schedule is, but we're going to eat here and we expect you to be here. And there were weeks that we didn't do it every night, but for sure on Sunday and then 3 to 4 days, nights a week, we sat down and had that kind of conversation. I think that helped our family. I think that sitting down at the dinner table, having a conversation, talking about what's going on in life, having a conversation about God's word, I think that's a key element. A second thing I would say is Kathy helped me to balance my ministry and my home life. And there were times that she said to me, hey, you've been gone too many nights. You haven't been home with the kids. I haven't seen you. I haven't had a conversation. There were times that I got frustrated with that, but then there were other times that God prompted me and said, she's right. And so I would have to recalculate or recalibrate and come back to, yeah, she's right. And so I need to do this. And then truthfully, she did a huge part of raising our kids. And she is as much and probably more important to the legacy of our family and it's being able to be sustained. And I would say to you, the older I get, Colby, the more I see the value in my kids serving the Lord, marrying someone who loves the Lord, and then raising their kids to serve and love the Lord. Because when I was growing up, I did experience the proverbial pastor's kid who was incredibly wild. And so it was a conscious decision on Kathy and my part. We want to do everything that we can for that not to happen to us. And so I think those were key elements for us.
What were some challenges that you guys faced in trying to raise your kids? I know scheduling was probably a challenge because, like I said, they were all active and doing multiple things. And with you with church and everything, as Kathy was teaching, I know that created more stuff too. So what were some challenges that you guys faced in raising them?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's the normal challenge of kids, friends, what they want to do, what we would say to them. No, you're not going to do that. And you're not going to do that because as a follower of Christ, that's not something that we see as being valuable. You're not going to wear that particular item. I mean, I've had people say, I want to be a friend to my child. And the truth of the matter is, God has called me to be a parent. And so there are things that I'm going to share with my child. I'm going to say to my child that they're not going to like. And they're going to say, and we had our kids say this to us at different times, I hate you. I hate you. And our response back was, we love you and we care for you. A second element was Kathy and I publicly were always on the same page. Now, privately, we would go and have a conversation and she would say something to the effect of, I think you were wrong there. And there were times I came out of that conversation and I went to whomever the child was and I said, you know what? I messed up. I did the wrong thing and I shouldn't have done that. There was even an instance, for example, where Jeffrey came home from college. She'd been to school first semester. She's our oldest child. She's going to Howard Payne. She's a good kid. But she comes home and I said, so what are you going to do today? I'm getting ready to go to work. She's getting ready. We're the only ones there. Everybody else has gone to school. And she said, well, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And I went, no, you're not. You're not going to do that. I'm your dad and you're here. And I left. And I walked out of the house and Colby, I felt incredibly convicted that, we have a different relationship here. I have been her parent and I have been very directive, but really she is becoming an adult and I really am becoming more of a consultant. So that's been the joy as they've gotten older is I feel like I have earned the right to be their friend. Now, who do they call more? They probably call Kathy more than me. I mean, that probably happens, but there's other stuff that my kids will call me and say, Dad, what do you think about this? And so I, I think there are different stages, right, in parenting. And I think we have to understand that we've got to be the parent on the front end. There's a lot of direction that comes along with that. And then as they get older, we've got to let the reins go and let them bloom and blossom and see how God shapes them. And we're incredibly proud of our kids at this stage of their lives. They love the Lord, they're serving the Lord. And yeah, it's a lot of fun for us as grandparents.
Well, you hit on something a second ago about Kathy being on your side. How important do you think that is to have spouses on the same side? Because I know sometimes it's, mom and daughter against dad, or mom and son and dad against mom, or, sometimes the kids will play each other. Sometimes parents will play off each other. How important is it for you guys to be on the same side, do you think?
Gosh, I'm trying to think of the best metaphor. I mean, it's crucial. I mean, because I have seen that. I mean, that's happened in our own relationship. We're not perfect. There have been a few times where, I was siding with one of the kids about this and I would say, come on, let's do that. And then, I would get a look from Kathy or I might give her a look. And that would lead us to a conversation in the bedroom. And we just came to see that when one is pitted against the other, it's going to always be a conflict. And it does create tremendous tension. And, kids are smart and they pick up on that. And when they, for example, one of the kids would come to see me and say, hey, can I go do this? And then I would say no, and they would go see their mother, and their mom might say yes, or maybe I said yes, and I didn't talk to Kathy beforehand. And then, the kid would come back and say, well, Dad said yes, and you said no. What are we going to do? And so, we had to have that conversation and say, look, Mom and I are going to be on the same page. You're not going to pit us against each other. Colby, I think particularly in a single parent home, a blended family, that can be a huge problem. And that's hard to figure out. And I don't have the answers for that, but I'm just saying as much as you can, if publicly you can be unified, that's going to make a huge difference. I mean, You think even in regard to the church, you work with Brother Cody and yourself and others on your staff. You as a staff need to have a unified front as best you can. And I'm just telling you right now that if you get one of those staff members who's not unified, dude, that creates a huge tension. In the same
Mhm.
way, you work in the fire department. If you guys in leadership are not on the same team and pulling in that same direction and there's disagreement, it's a huge problem.
A lot of conflict that's unnecessary. I mean,
I,
that's the because
yeah,
it's usually if you're not in agreement. I mean, there's either a really good reason you're not in agreement, or it's a really petty reason you're not in agreement. If it's a really good reason, then you still need to have those conversations to where you can find agreement. And if it's petty, somebody needs to realize this is petty, and I think in marriage, what the things that we've had too, Melissa and I, we're blessed too. Our kids are good kids. They're smart kids. They make good decisions. There are times they play the pit mom and dad against each other because they know dad sometimes goes, well, as long as you're not going to do this, 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 that's fine. I don't care. And sometimes mom is like, okay, she knows more about their school stuff. She's like, well, they've got testing tomorrow. They have whatever. And now that we have a son driving, Connor was gone out the other night and it was after church and he was with some friends after church. They went to eat. I was at the fire station that night and it was Wednesday before last. And she texted, he's not home yet. It's after 10. He's not home. I was like, well, he just started driving. We haven't really given him a time. We know he's with his friends. And now we have this great thing you didn't have back then, but called Life 360. We could look, what's he doing? They're driving down Sam Rayburn. They're cruising around town. Like,
yeah,
that's what we used to do, like
yeah,
and he got home at like 11 o'clock, yeah, but we hadn't given that direction. But I
yeah,
was like, well, as long as he's with his, we trust the friends he's with, so we know they're not doing anything wrong, but it was still kind of, had to have that conversation of, I don't see a problem with it. Well, he needs to tell us, okay, yeah, you're right. He does need to tell us. So we kind
yeah.
of had that. What's a funny story about your kids? Give us something funny.
Yeah, well, I mean, Andrew's told it. It's kind of funny to me. So we lived about 3 blocks from the church. We lived down on East Ninth Street. And one of the early jobs that was kind of passed down to our kids was locking up the building. So Jeffrey was the oldest. She had that job. She goes off to college. So now we got to find somebody else. Andrew interviews, gets the job. So now his job is to lock the doors at First Baptist. I mean, one of the crazy things about First Baptist Church Bonham, they've kind of rectified it to some degree. But honestly, there's like 20 or 25 doors you've got to lock. And so anyway, Andrew's doing that. Ashton is probably 10 or 11 years old, and she's hanging out with her big brother. And they like to hang out together. And so she stayed with him. She locked up. Well, we sat down for the Sunday afternoon meal, and we're all there around the table. All the kids are there. And so, we're asking them, so what's been your favorite part of the day so far? And Ashton says, Dad, the coolest thing happened today. Andrew drove backwards from the church all the way home. And you could have heard a pin drop, and we all just kind of looked at Andrew and went, Andrew, did you do that? Yes, sir. Yes, sir, I did. So we laugh about it now. It was a hilarious thing. But here, Andrew had gotten in that pickup and had driven over 3 blocks, making 3 different turns or 4 different turns into our
Mm-hmm.
driveway. And he did it backwards with our 10-year-old daughter. So yeah, so
That's pretty good driving.
it is. It is. Yeah. It was pretty good
That's
driving.
impressive.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. But those
So check.
kinds of stories come out more at the dinner table when we get together now at special events. And I would say a part of that legacy when they're adults is bringing them back in for special events. And we do that at least 4 times, 5 times a year. And Kathy's the party planner. You got to have somebody who's the party planner. She does it. They come together and it is a blast, man. It is so fun sitting down around the table talking.
Transitioning a little bit. That's your one of your funny kids stories, parenting stories. Give me a funny church pastoring, leading a congregation story.
Well, I will say this. One of the things I began to understand as I was at Bonham, and when I came to Bonham, I went from being a single full-time staff guy to now we're a multi full-time staff. So we've got Dave Renfro, who's doing music and ed. Kevin Towery's doing youth. We've got 2 secretaries. So we're up to 5. And then we've got some part-time folks like yourself and other college students that helped us along the way. So we were in the process of creating we called it a 101 membership class. And I am great at drawing stick figures. And that's the extent of my artistic abilities. We had good content with this 4-session material. We felt like it was biblical. It was good. We went to Office Depot in Sherman. I mean, that's how far back it goes. They were the ones who created it for us. And it was a black and white stick figure document with a red cover. And so we taught it. Well, about 2 or 3 weeks after we had finished, this lady who was at our church then, her name is Leanne Sims, and she's still around. She lives in Amarillo now. Anyway, Leanne came to me and she said, would you let me take a look at this material and see if I can't improve it a little bit? And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, put some color in it. And so I said, well, sure, go ahead. Well, she takes all of the content and then she creates this beautiful document. So it was if you went from black and white TV to color. And from then on, if we had anything like that we needed done, we gave it to Leanne. And what that taught me was the value of empowering people that God had gifted to do things within the local church. And I think that's crucial. No matter if your church has 20 people or 2,000, you've got to be empowering people that God has gifted and let them do what he's gifted them to do.
Really good advice. In church and any organization, if you have, well, number one, people have ownership when it's theirs,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
they'll go to bat for it because it's theirs. It's something that they're committed to, something that they've bled for and sweated for. It's something that they've invested in. But the other thing it does is it gives them a seat at the table. And the more people that have a seat at the table, the more people that catch the vision, that see the vision, that understand the vision. So I think that's really good advice, is to entrust people to do things that they're gifted to do. And really, as leaders, you're doing a disservice if you don't do that.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of biblical, right? God has placed members in the body as it pleases him, which is what Paul tells us. And so we ought to be doing that.
So we talked about family. What are some things that you guys did at First Baptist Bonham, or maybe even other churches? What are some purposeful things that you did to help? I don't want to say build legacy, because at the time you don't think that you're building legacy, but just to help people develop their faith and to maybe help them develop their own legacy. What are some things that you guys have done, maybe some challenges in trying to do that?
Legacy with the individual. I mentioned that we had a 101 membership training. I think any church needs to have some kind of structured basic discipleship curriculum that everyone goes through and everyone learns about. Something as simple as how to have a quiet time, how to pray, how to share your faith. That became for us what we called a 101 curriculum. A 201 curriculum was helping a person to identify that God had gifted them, and these are gifts that are there. We also looked at passion. What are you passionate about? We found that some folks were incredibly passionate about children. Some were passionate about youth. Some were passionate that if they hung out with youth too long, they would injure them. And so we didn't want to have them in with the students, right? So helping them to find their passion, gifts, and then making them aware of opportunities for where they could serve. Then that 301 that we had would talk specifically about developing your testimony, helping you to come up with a comfortable strategy of sharing your faith. And then as a third element of that, what are you doing to reach out to others, and what is your ministry? So I think some kind of structure like that it definitely helps. There's pre-printed material out for that, but I think it's crucial in the local church. Another element that was crucial to us was, and this becomes a real challenge for the local church today. You got a lot of folks who would show up for worship, but then they're not taking that second step by going to a small group. And I think it still holds true. I think if you want longevity in your local church, you've got to develop a strong small group ministry. Whether it's on campus or off campus, you need to have folks plugged into small groups. And that, in my estimation, Colby, really, I think runs kind of in tandem. And what I mean by that is we've got some guys who want to plant a church and they're so consumed with the worship service that they forget about the small group setting. And so they gather the crowd, but then they don't have a structure for discipling and for helping these folks to assimilate and develop community within the congregation. So you've got to be running both of those. And certainly in the church that's been around for 150 years, they need to have a strong, vibrant small group ministry. Now, as part of that, I think you're going to be teaching seasonal kinds of classes. You're going to be teaching a class on parenting. I think another element, truthfully, Colby, that's forgotten about in the local church is or are single parent homes. Where we are in Denton County, there are a lot of single parent homes. And sometimes we're so consumed with talking about getting families, and we might even say young families into our church, we forget about the single parent family. And so we would do some targeted ministries to single parents. We'd have a class or a small group for single parents, and we would try and tackle those issues in that situation. And then the other element I think that made an impact on our community was we had a recovery ministry for the alcoholic and the drug addict. And that was a perfect example of empowering people to run it. I had not been an alcoholic or a drug addict. I wasn't the guy leading it. But I think there were a lot of folks that came to our church through that ministry that were cared for and nurtured and came to know Christ and were able to see how the Bible applied to their situation using what's called a life recovery Bible. It was incredibly helpful. I think those are key elements. Probably the last thing I would think of is, and I see this more and more in kind of a metropolitan area, and that is a local church has to understand their uniqueness and they have to be willing to reach out to a specific area or do a specific ministry. They've got to determine what makes them unique and what are they willing to do to reach people that are in those situations, to determine their uniqueness and then to care for them. I think that leads to legacy too.
So it sounds like a lot of what you're talking about is just seeing needs, seeing what a need is, meeting a need, and sometimes acknowledging that maybe I'm not the person to meet the need. Maybe someone else can meet that need, but I need to empower them to do it, to do what they feel called to do and where their gift is.
Well, yeah, and I would say even as we think about, I mean, in Bonham, Texas, as I recall, there's about 10 or 12 Baptist churches, and then you've got other denominations. And one of the things we try and do in working with a church is we try and say, what makes your church unique from all the other churches in the area? Not that you have to have the same ministries that every church has, but what is it about your church that makes you unique? During the time that I was in Bonham, one of the things that we identified was we ought to be doing something in regard to recovery for alcoholics and drug addicts. Every church doesn't necessarily need to do that. That's just what we saw as a ministry. If you're in the metro area, we've tried to say, okay, is there an elementary school that you need to connect to and reach out to? Or one of our churches said, we see a real need for fostering in our community. And they're huge proponents for foster care. And they see that as being a key ministry for them. So it's embracing what God has called you to do. And it's not focusing in, but out to meet those needs and sharing the gospel as you do it.
Well, Morgan, I want to thank you for your time today. I want to thank you for a lot of good conversation. It was good for me just getting to catch up. I enjoy getting to speak with you. And again, I get to see your son Andrew on a regular basis. And when he laughs, I'm reminded of you every time.
Yeah.
Have the same laugh. And I get to hear, obviously I'm not at church with him because I'm
Yeah.
leading at my own church, but
Right.
even when I watch the live stream and when I listen to the message, I see your legacy and your preaching style in your son. Like
Oh,
I
wow.
see that a little bit.
Okay.
He may be happy about that or he may not. I don't know, but I see that there. So I'm thankful for you. I'm thankful for your friendship, thankful for your mentorship with me, because like I said, I feel like that any ministry that I'm a part of, that's part of your legacy as well. And it's something that as we think about legacy, we need to remember is there's times that we may not see the full impact of what we do. We invest in people while we have them. We love people while we have them. And then at some point they may go on and do their own thing, but we have to trust that in the time that we had them, that we could make an impact, that we could lead, that we could disciple, that we could teach, whatever it is. We made good use of that time. And so I want to thank you for, I feel like making good use of your time and a lifetime of that, of ministry serving. So I want to thank you for being here today. Thank you, Morgan. Thank you for watching. Called to Lead. We want to invite you to subscribe, like, and share so that more people can hear this content, things that they may desperately need to hear. So thank you again. We'll see you next time on Called to Lead.